What if I told you that the greatest gold mine in human history was not discovered deep inside a treacherous mountain or buried under thousands of tons of ancient solid rock, but was manufactured entirely inside a tiny jungle laboratory, using a simple metal file and cheap wedding rings to completely fool the smartest bankers on Wall Street? Welcome to Money's Hidden Past. Rich people lied. We fact-checked. Today we are traveling deep into the humid jungles of Indonesia to break down the infamous story of Bre-X Minerals, a tiny Canadian penny stock that promised infinite wealth and ultimately vaporized $6 billion in a single week. We are breaking down the absolute largest mining fraud of the 20th century, a company that convinced the entire global financial system that they had discovered the motherlode of all gold deposits without ever actually producing a single commercially viable ounce. To understand how this global financial hallucination happened, we have to travel back to Calgary in 1989 and meet a struggling stock promoter named David Walsh, who was completely bankrupt and rapidly running out of options. Walsh was operating a failing business out of his own basement, drowning in credit card debt, and desperate for a miracle, so he took the absolute last of his personal funds and flew halfway across the world to the Indonesian archipelago. He was desperately looking for a spectacular story to sell to investors, and he found exactly what he needed in two seasoned geologists, a respected industry veteran named John Felderhoff, and a charismatic project manager named Michael de Guzman. Felderhoff had previously discovered a legitimate massive gold mine, so his name brought instant credibility to any new speculative project. And de Guzman was a highly persuasive and brilliant geologist who claimed he knew exactly where the next massive strike was hiding. They told Walsh about a remote and completely undeveloped site deep in the dense and unforgiving jungle of the island of Borneo, a place called Busang that was totally cut off from civilization and completely ignored by all the major international mining corporations. Walsh bought the mining rights for essentially pennies on the dollar, and Bre-X Minerals officially became an active Indonesian exploration company trading on the absolute lowest tiers of the Canadian stock market, hoping to simply find enough gold to keep the corporate lights on the physical environment. At Busang was an absolute logistical nightmare. It was isolated from any established roads or modern infrastructure, meaning every single piece of heavy drilling equipment and diesel fuel had to be expensively dropped in by heavy transport helicopters. The men working the massive steel drills were operating in brutal heat, pulling long cylinders of dense solid rock from hundreds of feet underground. These core samples are the scientific lifeblood of any mining operation because they tell you exactly what the invisible earth looks like far below the standard procedure is to take these heavy rock cores to a preparation shed where they are brutally crushed and pulverized into a fine gray powdery dust. And then that specific dust is shipped to an independent laboratory for chemical assay to officially measure exactly how many parts per million of gold exist. This logistical gap between the crushing shed and the final chemical laboratory was the exact brilliant vulnerability that Michael de Guzman ruthlessly exploited. He knew that once the rock was crushed, no one could verify its original state, making it the perfect opportunity to introduce highly foreign and fake material. For the first few months, the massive drilling at Busang produced nothing. The company was rapidly running out of money and facing total collapse. Investors were getting incredibly nervous and threatening to pull their funding. So Michael de Guzman decided it was finally time to manufacture a miracle. De Guzman walked into the tiny isolated processing shed in the dense jungle where the rock samples were crushed before being sent to the testing lab. He took a simple metal file and his own personal gold wedding ring and quietly shaved tiny metallic flakes directly into the crushed rock dust. This incredibly illegal and ancient mining trick is historically called salting, and it is specifically designed to magically add value to completely worthless dirt. When the independent laboratory chemically tested that specific batch of rock samples, the results came back, showing an absolutely massive concentration of pure gold. The Bre-X stock price immediately started to move violently on the amazing news, but you cannot salt a multi-billion-dollar mine with just one single wedding ring. So de Guzman secretly hired local prospectors to pan for natural gold dust in the muddy rivers physically surrounding the massive Busang exploration camp. For the next 3 years, de Guzman orchestrated an absolute masterpiece of global fraud. He bought thousands of dollars of raw river gold from the local villagers and systematically added specific measured amounts of it into every single core sample, carefully calculating the geological ratios so the fake data looked perfectly natural. The laboratory results began to consistently indicate something completely unprecedented. The estimated mathematical size of the Busang gold deposit just kept rapidly growing. First, they officially claimed it was 2 million ounces. Then they claimed 10 million until they were aggressively promising an absolutely impossible 200 million ounces to put that absurd and spectacular number into proper historical perspective that would easily make it the absolute largest single gold deposit ever discovered. containing roughly 8% of all the known gold reserves on the entire planet, sitting completely untouched under the mud of a highly remote Indonesian jungle. The institutional financial markets absolutely lost their collective and greedy minds. The Bre-X stock price violently exploded from mere pennies a share to nearly $300 a share, at its absolute dizzying peak, turning everyday Canadian retail investors into sudden overnight paper millionaires. Massive global investment banks like Lehman Brothers and JP Morgan endorsed the company, publishing incredibly detailed and highly technical printed financial reports that completely validated the absolutely fake and manipulated geological data, because they were completely blinded by the massive potential investment banking fees as the fake geological reports continued to absolutely dazzle. The financial world, traders were completely ignoring the traditional and boring mathematical metrics of valuation, and were trading Bre-X purely on the dangerous adrenaline of speculation. While completely ignoring the red flags that were beginning to quietly surface, none of these highly educated Ivy League financial analysts realized a fundamental flaw. The gold found in the Bre-X core samples had entirely smooth, rounded edges, which only happens to gold that has been naturally tumbled in a flowing river, while gold physically trapped inside solid volcanic rock should have sharp, jagged edges. But absolutely nobody wanted to actually stop the massive and highly lucrative party. The massive Canadian pension funds poured hundreds of millions of dollars into the stock, and Bre-X quickly reached a staggering market valuation of roughly $6 billion, all based entirely on the creative fiction of one man standing in a wooden shed back in Canada. The financial exposure of the average citizen was heartbreaking. Entire small towns had completely pooled their hard-earned blue-collar community savings to aggressively buy shares of the company because they trusted the educated banking experts, who went on national television every single night to fiercely defend the massive valuation. But when you suddenly publicly claim to own the most valuable piece of land on Earth, the most powerful and highly dangerous people in the world take immediate notice by 1996. The Bre-X deposit was deemed a massive strategic national asset, and the incredibly corrupt political regime in the Indonesian capital got involved. President Suharto essentially utilized his dictatorial governmental power to legally force Bre-X to completely surrender a massive percentage of the entire project, and effectively forcing Bre-X to partner with a real American corporate mining giant called Freeport-McMoRan, who were absolute industry veterans. And impossible to fool, Suharto dictated that Freeport would physically build and operate the actual mine, which meant Freeport was immediately going to send their own highly trained geologists to physically drill their own independent core samples and firmly verify the gold, causing the massive 3-year house of cards to violently and rapidly collapse in a highly suspicious and incredibly convenient turn of completely random events. The main administrative records building at the Busong jungle camp suddenly caught fire, burning all of the detailed original geological notes and sample histories to absolute ash. But a mysterious jungle fire could not stop Freeport from drilling fresh holes. Freeport confidently drilled exactly where Bre-X told them the massive gold vein was located. They pulled up the heavy rock cores and independently tested them under strict security. And the chemical laboratory results came back, showing absolutely nothing but worthless dirt. There was absolutely zero valuable gold in the entire supposedly magical Indonesian mountain. Freeport executives were absolutely furious and demanded an immediate explanation from Bre-X. So the panicked company ordered Michael de Guzman to quickly fly out to the jungle site, to personally meet with the highly skeptical Freeport geologists and defend his spectacular data. But Michael de Guzman would never actually make it to that absolutely crucial meeting. On March 19, 1997, de Guzman boarded an Alouette transport helicopter, flying high above the incredibly dense and totally unforgiving jungle canopy of Borneo. About 20 minutes into the routine flight, the heavy side door unexpectedly swung open, and the brilliant architect of the greatest fraud in history violently plummeted to the earth. The official Indonesian governmental report stated that he committed suicide by jumping, but the massive search parties did not find a body in the dense jungle for 4 days, and when they finally did, it was completely unrecognizable and heavily decomposed, identified only by the incredibly convenient presence of a few specific remaining teeth, with their star geologist officially dead. The absolute institutional panic violently set, and an independent auditing firm called Strathcona was frantically hired to verify the entire project. And their official final technical report was the most devastating document in financial history, boldly stating the Busong gold deposit was a completely unprecedented and massive fake when the Strathcona auditors analyzed the exact chemical distribution of the original gold dust. They found that the fake gold was entirely concentrated on the absolute surface of the dust, sitting lazily on top like powdered sugar on a freshly baked pastry, proving beyond any scientific doubt that the samples had been entirely manipulated. The professional auditors were absolutely stunned by the simplistic arrogance of the entire scheme. It was literally a guy in the humid jungle physically pouring gold dust out of a small jar, and that primitive physical action completely short-circuited the entire global financial system, crashing the highly inflated stock price of Bre-X from $200 to absolute zero in a matter of highly chaotic hours, roughly $6 billion of investor wealth. Evaporated massive institutional pension funds, instantly lost hundreds of millions of working-class dollars. Retail investors who had foolishly mortgaged their entire homes to buy the stock were totally ruined, suffering a catastrophic and historic loss of global financial trust. The incredible irony is that the actual amount of real gold physically purchased by de Guzman to meticulously salt the thousands of core samples over 3 incredibly stressful years was only worth about $60,000 total dollars on the open physical commodity market, aggressively used as a tiny physical seed to magically grow a $6 billion empire. The aftermath of the complete Bre-X collapse was an absolute masterclass in escaping justice. David Walsh claimed complete ignorance and quietly moved to the Bahamas, tragically dying of a brain aneurysm a year later without spending a day in a prison cell, while John Felderhoff was entirely acquitted of all federal criminal insider trading charges. The strict regulations governing the massive global mining industry had to be completely rewritten. Because the modern financial system finally realized that blind optimistic trust is a terrible strategy, and that human beings will eagerly believe a brilliantly executed lie. If the psychological promise of infinite wealth and the financial payout is large enough, the highly educated guys trading the volatile penny stock forgot it was supposed to be a real mine. They foolishly thought they were just playing a highly lucrative and exciting numerical video game, until the harsh reality of the game suddenly forced them to actually produce the physical heavy metal, leaving them quietly holding a radioactive bag of completely worthless paper certificates. So the next time you hear a highly paid financial expert wearing a tailored suit on television talking excitedly about a guaranteed massive financial return on an exotic international investment, remember the terrifying and true story of the entirely fake gold mine hidden deep in the Indonesian jungle, and exactly how a single metal file and a cheap wedding ring managed to completely break Wall Street. If this deep dive into the absolute Bre-X gold hoax of the 1990s and the incredible madness of corporate financial fraud completely fired you up about properly understanding how modern fortunes are truly built and violently destroyed, then do me a massive favor right now. Smash that like button to firmly let the algorithm know this highly important conversation actually matters. Share this video with every single smart friend and family member who truly loves fascinating stories of exactly how massive wealth and power are truly created. Let us absolutely keep violently exposing what they simply do not want you to see. I will definitely catch you in the next incredibly wild one, where we totally break down the absolute next hidden chapter in the extremely long history of modern money and absolute unyielding corporate power. Until then, stay highly informed, stay incredibly skeptical, and if a spectacular story sounds entirely too good to be true, it absolutely usually is.